You're listening to the Empowered Divorce Podcast, where you practice being the chooser in your life again, one day at a time. Thanks for joining me. Hello, my amazing, beautiful listeners. Welcome. How are you today? Thank you for joining me. Those of you who were with me last week at the free live Q&A session that happens the first Thursday of every month, I let all of those who were in attendance know, but those of you that weren't able to make it or still haven't been able to join, because it's been during the day, starting in April, the time has changed. It will still be the first Thursday of every month, but we are now moving to 4 p.m. Pacific, 5 Mountain, 6 Central, and 7 Eastern time. Again, if you want to join me live the first Thursday of every month, I always teach some concept or tool. Oftentimes I throw a handout in your client portal to go along with it, but it's just such an opportunity to be with other women who get it and who are going through a life-saving divorce. So go to amiewoolsey.com, click on resources, register for the Q&A. You'll get a notification reminder the day before and an hour before, which I love because my brain still to this day has a hard time remembering things. So if you register, you will get that reminder. I would love for you to join me. Okay. Last week, we talked about how to identify where you need a boundary. And if you did that work, you probably walked away with some clarity around some places where you might have some energy leaks, where maybe you feel trapped, where fear is perhaps fueling and charging and running the decisions that you're making, or where you might still be hoping for something that either isn't in your control or just isn't accessible, isn't coming anymore. So you know where you might need some boundaries. Where a lot of people also get stuck is then the, what do I actually do? Okay, how do I set the boundary? What are the words? What oftentimes, at least I didn't know or no one told me, some of the most important boundaries going through divorce, after divorce, post-divorce, aren't with the ex at all. They're mostly with yourself. Today, we're going to talk about those stages of boundaries because, yes, there are stages. And we're going to talk about what you can boundary, what you can't, how you're going to give we're going to give an actual language using some framework that I think makes it so much easier. Boundaries are not just stopping other people from doing things. They really are about you taking back control of your time, your energy, your peace, and your life. So that you can, as I say at the end of every podcast, be the creator of your life. Something that I think is worth mentioning because we talk a lot about boundaries. I think a lot of y'all hear a lot of talk around boundaries, but boundaries don't always start as boundaries. Sometimes they start as requests. And that's what actually happens in healthy relationships. We communicate what we need. Requests are relational. They come from knowing yourself, knowing what you want, knowing what you need, knowing what's okay and not okay, and what you have a right to, and then being able to say that out loud. The problem is, a lot of you are way past that point with your ex, but I still wanted you to understand the stages because I think that really matters when we've lived in this type of heightened threat and when we've moved so far past requests. At least I'll speak for myself. I felt like I was bringing that energy into other relationships. In fact, I remember dating going in with those boundaries hardcore rather than basic communication because I had lived so amped up for so long and just expecting people to railroad right over me. I think it's good to remember that it isn't a bad thing to give people the benefit of the doubt that they're going to respect your request. Now, when they don't, and we'll get there, then we amp up, so to speak. We move to the next stage, and that is a more clear, defined, with consequence boundary. I remember not long after Scott and I got married, I woke up one morning and rolled over, and he was laying in bed and he was on his phone. Well, that triggered me because in my previous relationship, that had happened multiple times and found out that that was actually happening on that phone was betrayal. So my body went into a total trauma response and I froze. I started crying. he wasn't doing anything on his phone but checking email. It just triggered me. I came at it really hardcore with a boundary rather than a request. And that's why I'm bringing this up, is that I went hardball in. And at that point, really didn't give him an opportunity to show that he could meet my need and to show that in a healthy relationship, when you make a request, when you have a need, and especially for me in that moment where this was something that was coming back up for me that was really hard, really sad, really painful, really heavy. I didn't give him an opportunity at that point to meet me where I'm at, to have empathy, to have compassion, and to build that trust. Because I was hardcore. If you ever, it's actually an ultimatum. If you ever do that again, I'm going to sleep in the other room. I was trying to be boundary, but I was really just giving him an ultimatum. I learned my lesson there and was able to reframe and have a redo and say, hey, this is really triggering for me. I totally understand that you are not doing anything wrong here. It would be helpful while I work through these triggers with my therapist still, if you could not have the phone in bed. And of course, he was more than willing to meet that request. But coming in super hard, I didn't give him an opportunity to show me that he could be trustworthy. So, a request is a really important thing to remember when we talk about boundaries because it's the relational starting point. Hey, this would work better for me. Would you be willing to do this thing? And assuming in good faith that the other person cares about you. It's not a when you have been betrayed and the person that you thought was caring about you, you find out wasn't, yeah, it makes sense why that cognitive generalization is going to kick in, where I'm just going to think that everybody is a threat, right? But if we're working on healing, if we're moving forward, progressing and shifting, then we also can shift back into making requests. Hey, would you be willing to give me a heads up if you're running late for pickup? It would really help me plan my evening. And that works when we're dealing with someone that's reasonable, respectful, and wants the relationship to work. They're going to hear your request. They are willing to maybe make an adjustment. You might make another adjustment so that we can both make it work and then everyone moves forward. Now, when you can do this, it really supports your own ability to take up space. And I don't know about you specifically, but I know for me, I really did not believe that I could take up space. It was in so many subconscious ways and conscious, not allowed. Learning how to make a request was actually part of my work in healing, which is why I'm bringing it up. If you feel like this feels hard or triggering or impossible, then this is a really good thing to bring to your professional. Knowing what you need, clearly articulating that, having a voice, giving it a voice is relational. It's healthy. It's good. Now, boundaries. When a request isn't respected, when someone repeatedly refuses to respect that request, then we move to a boundary. And a boundary is no longer asking them to change or shift or adjust or compromise or accommodate. It's declaring what you will do. So, a request is, would you be willing to keep our text focused on the kids? That doesn't get respected. Boundary, I'm only going to respond to texts that are about the kids. Do you see the difference there? We're not asking anymore. We're telling them what you will do to protect your time and energy. You're not even telling them what to do. We're obviously assuming that they're not going to do anything that you've requested or asked. So that's what we're now assuming. Instead of assuming the best, we're assuming that, okay, they're going to do them. We're going to do us. So I am only going to respond to texts that are about the kids. That is how you protect your time and your energy leaks. He still texts whenever he wants. You're just declaring when you will engage. One of my favorite books on boundaries is The Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban. And I love how she frames so many of her boundaries. But she says, when someone shows you over and over that they will not honor your boundaries, it's time to end the friendship or the relationship. And so, those of you that are listening, already divorced, your limit is maxed out, which is why you're here and why we're talking about boundaries. But I just felt like it was important to first share what the stages are and why we're here. The other thing that I just want to briefly talk about that I see a lot of times show up when my clients start setting boundaries is that really awesome part of us called guilt. So we've identified where we need a boundary, but oftentimes we don't believe we have a right to set one. And I can give you all the language in the world, but deep down, if you don't actually believe that you're allowed to say no, allowed to have limit, allowed to protect yourself, you're not going to hold them. So let's talk about your rights when it comes to boundaries after divorce and how to handle the guilt that sometimes shows up when you start leaning into boundary setting. Someone that I have referred to for years being in this work is Moving Beyond Betrayal by Vicky Tidwell Palmer. It's her book of boundaries when we're trying to work through a relationship after betrayal. A lot of her work is for those that are staying in the relationship. But one of the things that she points out in her book is and names is the Bill of Rights, as she calls it. She really validates how oftentimes when women, especially, start to set boundaries, say no, we can be viewed as, in fact, her podcast is called Beyond Witchy with a B. I think my editor is going to bleep out that B word, but we get called that. We get viewed that way. You're mean, you're a B, you're whatever. She really just calls that out. But you have rights. You absolutely have rights. The first two Bill of Rights that she has, which I absolutely love and I share as many times as I possibly can, is I have the right to be wrong and I have the right to change my mind. And I love these. I love these two first Bill of Rights because boundary setting takes practice. Relationships takes practice. We're not always going to get it right. We're not always going to know maybe exactly what boundary we need. And sometimes we need to tighten it up. Sometimes we need to loosen it up. Sometimes when we're still processing trauma and abuse, it's normal to adjust along the way. You might set a boundary and then 6 months later realize, actually, I'm ready to shift that. Or now maybe the boundary wasn't quite right and I need to make it a little bit firmer. It doesn't make you wishy-washy. It makes you human. Sometimes we create a boundary with limited information and later we get additional information that further informs us, which then maybe shifts the way that we approach that situation or circumstance. You have the right to be wrong and then change your mind. You also have a right to prioritize your safety and your peace, even if it inconveniences someone else, even if they don't like it. Most of them won't. We say most won't because if we're past the request stage of the relationship, then they might not like the boundaries. You also have a right to keep your home and space safe. Your home is your sanctuary. You absolutely get to decide who comes in. You have a right to information privacy. You don't owe anyone access to your life, your finances, your dating situation, nothing. It's not about the kids. Immediate well being, it's not their business. You have a right to change the terms of the relationship. Just because someone had access to you before doesn't mean they get it now. You also have a right to protect your children without controlling their relationships. You can set boundaries that keep you safe while also allowing your kids to have relationships with people that you are no longer comfortable with. Both things can be true at the same time. You have a right to say no without any explanation. The famous sentence going around social media, no is a complete sentence. Yep. And I love that. Guilt, if it does show up for you, even though you might know that you have a right to these things, actually feeling like you have a right to them or setting a boundary can be totally different and really challenging when you're already in a challenging situation like divorce. For example, maybe you have an ex mother in law that still wants to come in the house and spend time with the kids. Maybe you actually liked her, maybe you even loved her during the marriage, but now maybe it just doesn't feel safe right now. Maybe you know that she's not a vault keeper and that she's going to maybe share private information or things that she sees in your space that right now doesn't feel safe with your ex. So, you know what? The trust is a little low because she's not a vault. So, what do? Because you want your kids to still have a relationship with their grandmother. And honestly, I'll just tell you if there's a grandparent that is still trying to reach out to your children and have a relationship with your kids despite divorce, I am telling you that matters to them so much. My kids absolutely clocked all of those people who stopped reaching out to them after the divorce. They noticed and it hurts. If ex mother in law isn't safe to come in the house anymore, A really kind, gentle way of approaching this is I want the kids to have a relationship with you. It would work best right now if you want to meet us at the park or meet us at the restaurant for lunch. Or, you know what? Feel free to pick them up for some time together. Here's when they're available. What you're doing here is, again, you have a right to keep your place safe and you're protecting that. That's your boundary. The kids have a right to relationship with their family despite the divorce. Again, both are true. You're not cutting her off and you're still protecting your space. When we're talking about boundaries after divorce, sometimes we want to lump our kids into our own boundaries. I think it's just important to point out that a lot of these are going to be separate your stuff from theirs. Your boundary with her doesn't have to be their boundary with her or whoever that is, including their parent. Now, let's say guilt creeps in. Maybe you feel mean. Maybe she cries. Maybe she's crying because she feels the loss of not being able to come in the home. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, it's going to affect everybody. It's not guilt telling you that you did something wrong. It's maybe showing up because you did something new. Most of the time, it's showing up because you did something new. Maybe you're not used to saying no, so your body's freaking out because it's unfamiliar. That's not the same as doing harm. So asking yourself, am I protecting myself or punishing someone else? It is important to know the difference. Boundaries are protection, not punishment. Maybe asking yourself, can this needs be met in a different way that doesn't violate my boundary? Like grandma saying the kids at the park instead of my house, problem solved. Guilt might come, but it doesn't mean that you're wrong. Oftentimes, it just means you're growing. Now, the next thing that I want to just mention around boundaries after divorce, because most of the boundaries are with you, because sometimes the person violating your boundaries the most is you. No matter how many times I told myself that it's not helpful to argue back, it's not helpful to point out all of the ways that he is gaslighting, manipulating, judging, creating false accusations. Like, oh, that was so hard to hold my own boundaries if I'm not responding to any messages that I'm not legally responsible to respond to about the kids. It was so hard. That part of me that wanted justice, the part of me that wanted even vengeance, the part of me that just wanted to speak my truth really got in the way the most of me violating my own boundaries. So, a couple ways that you can check in with yourself here. To see where you might need a boundary with yourself specifically. Look for those pain points in your day. What is creating the most angst, the most pain, the most frustration? Where are you feeling the most reactive, defensive, stressed, drained? Again, going back to the energy leaks. Is there a social media app that maybe makes you feel more anxious or self conscious or insecure than others? This might have nothing to do with your ex. There are so many boundaries that we can focus on to help give us our peace back, give us safety, give us time back in our life, places where we might need limits not with other people, but with ourselves. I think this is a great place to start. Most of the situations that my clients are frustrated about or stressed over or really creating a lot of energy leaks get resolved naturally when they start focusing on boundaries with themselves. I had a habit that I did not like. I'd have my phone on me all the time. Every room that I went in, every task, I just got in the habit of always keeping my phone. I would tuck it into my pants or tuck it into my bra. I just always had my phone on me. One day I was putting laundry away in my closet. I walked in to go put the laundry away and I realized that I didn't have my phone. I walked all the way back to the kitchen, grabbed my phone, walked all the way back to the closet. I had this like Oprah Winfrey aha moment. I just literally took time and energy to walk back to the kitchen and back just to get my phone. I didn't like the feeling that I had to have my phone with me putting laundry away. Because to be honest, what usually happens is I get on my phone and I find something that I need to look at, or, oh, I forgot that thing, or, let me just scroll through TikTok. And pretty soon I'm laying on my closet floor on my phone, not putting laundry away. I'm wasting time and not doing the thing that I set out to do. And the amount of times that Scott would come in and be like, well, hello, thought you were putting laundry away. And I'm sprawled out on the floor. I didn't like that, especially because then I feel guilty And depending what I was looking at, more anxious or more insecure. So the boundary that changed that was my phone stays out. My phone does not come in my bathroom closet area. That's the limit. I created that limit. There's no temptation. And then what's the consequence? Well, the consequence is if I bring the phone in there, I don't put the laundry away, I waste my time that I could be spending with even my husband and children. I feel guilty and I show up even worse for people that I love, especially if I'm feeling insecure coming out of that closet because I just spent way too much time on Instagram. So, creating your own self boundary, identifying your pain point, create a simple limit, identify the consequence. It's important to know when you break your own boundary, what happens? Do you break your boundary when you instead of watching one Netflix episode, you binge all 6? What's the consequence? Lack of sleep, wake up grumpy, get out of your routine, short and snappy with people. Like being able, it's so important to name what that is for yourself so that you know why you're holding that boundary when you're tempted to break it. Okay, now we're going to move into things that you cannot control or boundary. We're seeing why we need a boundary because requests were past that. You're identifying where you might need a boundary for yourself first, which might eliminate some of these other things that feel like you need a boundary with other people, might naturally be taken care of. You believe that you have a right to boundaries. You're working on believing and having those Bill of Rights for yourself. Now it's important to really be clear with yourself around the things that you cannot control and that you cannot boundary. As I read off some of these things, I want you to just take mental note, emotional note of the things that maybe feel really emotional, hard, triggering, or your brain pushes back on. Write it down, work with your professional around this. This isn't the end all be all list, but these are some of the more common ones that I've experienced the hard way and what I see a lot of times my clients really struggling with. So, things that we cannot boundary after divorce, cannot boundary and control what clothes he lets the kids wear at his house, what he feeds them. Yes, even if it's junk food, even if you are the one paying for that sugar high the following week. I know it sucks. You can't control what they watch on TV at the other parent's house, video games, screen times, even whether or not they have a device. Oftentimes, they get a device over at the other parent's house. Now, when they were at my house, there were limits, there were filters, there were controls. If I didn't have access to the phone to put a filter on, they didn't get the phone. That you can control. But when it's at the other parent's house, you can't control that. You can't control what time they go to bed over there or whether or not he brings them to their activities, church. Can't control who they date or when they date or who they leave the kids with on their parenting time. Yes, this one really is hard too, but unless there's a legitimate safety concern that can be upheld in court, it sucks. But leaving your kids with grandma or a babysitter on his time is not in your control. You can't control where he sits at the kids' events, whether he comes at all to the events, whether he texts the kids or doesn't text them. Can't control if the new girlfriend or boyfriend comes with them to pick up the kids. Can't control how many times he takes you back to court. You can't even control whether or not he pays child support. Even if he gets arrested for non payment multiple times, when he gets out, you cannot control if he starts paying again. Man, do I painfully know that one. You can't control his social life, their feelings about you, what they say about you. Taking a defamation complaint to court doesn't always pan out. You can't control where they work or if they work at all. Can't control what they put on social media, their finance choices. I know everything on the list sucks, and most of you are probably experiencing frustration around everything on this list. A lot of these things do affect you and your kids. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying they can't affect you or they can't impact you. What I'm saying is that you can't control that. And oftentimes, what would make your life easier around any of those things can actually create more harm or impact on your children's relationship with the father that will bite you in the butt later almost every time. Now, caveat, obviously, if there are real legitimate concerns for your child's safety, health, and that is in jeopardy, absolutely take action through the appropriate legal channels. But no lawyer is going to encourage or say that you can take co parenting time away over excess screen time, junk food, or the new girlfriend's always around. What we get to do is have all the feelings in the world about that. Those aren't things that you can create a boundary around. Those end up being ultimatums, and that just gets us in a horrible tug of war. Okay, now what can we boundary? Here we go. Finally, we've talked about what you can't control. Here's what you can. The biggest area where you get to implement boundaries is communication. You absolutely get to limit ways that you communicate. You get to limit the topics that you communicate about, and you absolutely get to be clear on those things. Now, the Big Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban, I love her framework. She codes boundaries into three categories based on the threat level. So she has them in green, yellow, and red. Green is low risk, gentle language. Green, I view as the request stage because we're assuming that the other person wasn't maybe aware that they were overstepping and they want to respect your limits. So your green boundary is clear, generous, and kind. You leave that potential consequence unsaid in the spirit of good faith because, again, green is assuming that the other person maybe wasn't aware that they stepped over a limit in some way. I associate that with making a request. It's still being very relational. Yellow, the risk is elevated. We're having a little firmer language. This is the follow up if the green boundary wasn't respected. It's just as clear, more firm. It includes the consequence if appropriate. This is where you say, you know what, if you continue to do X, then I'm going to do Y. Now, the risk elevates if that still isn't respected. And now we're at red. Now we're at a severe risk. Your most direct language is used here. And at this point, your health, your safety, and your relationship is in jeopardy. And your language needs to reflect the severity of that situation. We're still kind, but very clear. And this is their last reminder. And it makes clear what you will do to hold your limit. And at this point, you must be prepared to enforce and hold your limit. So knowing what that is beforehand is really important. Here's a scenario. He texts about personal things unrelated to the kids. Green. Hey, I'm going to focus our texts on the kids moving forward. Anything else can wait for another time. Yellow, because that's get blown over. I've mentioned that I like to keep our communication focused on the kids. If you continue to text about other topics, we won't be responding to those messages. So there's the I will part in there. That gets blown over, we're at red. I will only be responding to messages regarding the children, period. Another scenario. He wants to come inside your home during exchanges. If you're in the green phase, it's, hey, I prefer if we keep the exchanges at the door. It's just easier for me that way. Thanks for understanding. That gets blown over. He squeezes his way through the door again. Hey, I've asked that we do exchanges at the door. If you'd like to discuss something about the kids, we can do that through the app. You get pushback, it gets weaponized, all the things, we're at red. Exchanges happen at the door. I will not be inviting you into my home. If you need to have a longer conversation, send an email. If they're asking about your dating life, your finances, your personal business, again, green. That's not something I'm comfortable discussing. If you have questions about the kids, I'm happy to answer those. Yellow. You know what? I've mentioned that I'm not discussing my personal life. If you continue to ask, I'm ending the conversation. Red. I will only be communicating through the parenting app about the kids. Now, those of you who have an ex that's trying to engage in arguments about the past, or maybe an ex that sends these hostile texts blaming you or making false accusations, I'm only discussing logistics about the kids. I won't be responding to anything else. Oftentimes, the boundaries that we're setting post divorce are around the separate spaces and the respect around those spaces. So, knocking before entering, giving a heads up before coming over, not entering your home uninvited. Those are appropriate things to boundary. Information that you share or don't share. You get to boundary your dating relationships, your finances, your emotional experiences, and even kids' school information that he has access to. Gosh, that was a big one. I was getting hammered with not informing him of every little thing that was happening at the school. And I was so stressed and so panicked trying to make sure that I give him all the information, but then frustrated that I had to be responsible to give him all the information. And I remember my lawyer looking at me going, "Oh, does he not have an email?" I was like, of course, he said that facetiously. I was like, "Well, yeah." He goes, "Oh, can he not pick up a phone and call the school?" Yeah. "Oh, can he not give his email to the school to be notified around everything that you're being notified on?" And I was like, "Oh." For a lot of you listening, you're probably like, "No, duh, Amy." But that was one thing that I didn't realize I could have a boundary around. Parenting schedule. You're dealing with someone who doesn't respect boundaries. You stick to the parenting schedule line for line. Anything that changes or adjusts goes in writing first. No verbal agreements. Everything is documented. And then we can have boundaries around communication methods and timing. Maybe it's a parenting app only, email only. Maybe your response time is 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. And limiting personal topics absolutely get to be boundaried. I think the hardest thing about boundaries post divorce is letting go of their emotions, trying not to manage their anger. For those of you who've spent years walking on eggshells, managing their mood, trying to keep the peace, letting go of how they feel about your boundaries or what you're doing with your life, what you're limiting can sometimes feel impossible. But their emotions are not your responsibility, especially now. It's not yours to carry. And I hated that oftentimes it would get taken out on my children, but it gave me an opportunity to teach my children that they get to have boundaries too. And then it's not their job either to manage dad's emotions. Teaching your kids the art of saying no, that they don't need to feel guilty for having limits on when maybe they want to respond to text messages, that they too don't have to manage someone else's emotions is a really great thing to teach. I think the most frustrating thing that a lot of you might be feeling after this episode, because of how frustrated I was learning about boundaries post divorce, is realizing how little I could boundary and realizing how much I wanted to control that I couldn't. There are so many things that y'all are going to go through that are frustrating. You get to be frustrated by that. Ultimately, having an empowered divorce, getting to a place where these things that show up in our life, things that we can't and people that we can't control, if they are energy suckers, we ultimately are the ones responsible to adjust that. What often happens is we're trying to adjust that by focusing on what's outside of our control. I promise when you start dropping some of these ropes that feel necessary to hold on to, feel really important to hold on to, but really are not setting you free, they're just tying you down, binding you, holding you back from really being free. When you can let them go, it makes space for you to choose something different. It makes space for your energy to go to places you want it to go. The amount of times that I would say to my mom and dad, I just feel like I'm never going to be free. I just feel like I'm never going to be free. I just feel like it's never going to end. Will it ever end? Does this ever end? I just feel like there's one thing after another. And it was when I started to have boundaries for myself, to limit myself, to respect my own self, that allowed me to let go of so many of these ropes. When I accepted the things that I cannot control and leaned on my higher power to help me navigate, when I started to be more aware of the mental space that I was still giving to this person who harmed me, really opened my eyes and helped me let go even more. The practice part is real. I caught myself picking that rope right back up, believing that I had to or needed to, because for crying out loud, I'm sick and tired of this accusation. But every time I did, I leaked energy. There was visceral consequences for me when I gave him that space. So wherever you are in this journey, I think the different stages of boundary setting, how you set the boundary, many of you are able to make requests. Most of you aren't. Melissa Urban's book, The Book of Boundaries, addresses all kinds of situations and relationships. It might be a good one to check out if you want to practice boundary setting. She gives really good frameworks as well. Terry Cole has a book on boundaries. In fact, she's going to be joining the podcast here in a couple weeks, which I am so excited for. One of my favorite Brene Brown quotes, which Brene Brown has some great books on boundaries. And in fact, one of my favorite quotes from her, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. Sometimes our children are the ones that are going to get disappointed when we hold a boundary. Sometimes that disappointment is going to be you. I felt disappointment when I realized all the things that I can no longer control. When I realized all the things that I thought I was controlling, but realized I really can't. It's disappointing. Each of you deserves the version of yourself that is free, that is at peace. Boundaries give you that. Protect what's valuable to you. And you are valuable. Your time is valuable. Your energy is valuable. Your peace is valuable. It's what becoming the chooser is about. Choosing you and believing that you get to create the life that you want when you do, because you can. Take care, everybody.